The stars do not remember. They burn in their ancient furnaces, indifferent to the civilizations that rise beneath their light and fall into the cold dark between them. They witnessed the first Selenari ships unfurl their solar sails 11,000 years before humanity discovered fire. They watched our empire span 900 worlds, heard the songs of our poets echo across nebulae, and saw our philosophers unlock the mathematics of reality itself. And now the stars watch us die. They do not weep. They do not remember.
But I do.
My name is Karath. I was first archivist of the Eternal Library of Selvanos, keeper of 12 billion years of recorded history, guardian of knowledge that predates the formation of this galaxy's current spiral arms. I have lived for 3,712 standard cycles, and I have never known fear like this. I have never known despair. Our crystalline halls, where the wisdom of 1,000 extinct species once glowed in lattices of pure information, now sit dark and cold on a world that no longer exists. I watched Selvanos burn from orbit, watched the silver spires that had stood since before mammals evolved on Earth collapse into plasma and ash. I watched 17 billion of my people, scholars, artists, children, become nothing but expanding clouds of carbon and memory.
And I did nothing. I could do nothing.
The hollowing came without warning, without reason, without mercy. We had known of them for centuries, the species at the galaxy's edge who consumed rather than created, who saw consciousness itself as a resource to be harvested. We had studied them from afar, confident in our superiority, secure in our ancient defenses.
We were wrong.
Their fleets emerged from fold space in numbers that defied our projections. Not thousands of vessels, not tens of thousands, millions. They did not negotiate. They did not demand surrender. They simply began to feed. 47 worlds fell in the first rotation, 112 in the first cycle. By the time I fled Selvanos, we had lost over 400 systems, and the hollowing showed no signs of slowing. Our fleets, the mightiest armadas in known space, shattered against their advance like ice against a fusion torch.
I am telling you this because you must understand what brought me here.
Here, to this unremarkable station orbiting an unremarkable moon of an unremarkable gas giant in a system so far from the galactic center that my ancestors would have considered it the edge of oblivion. Here, to humanity, the last species I would have ever thought to ask for help. The docking clamps engaged with a gentle thud that vibrated through the hull of my courier ship, one of the last Selenari vessels still operational, its engines running on emergency reserves, its hull scarred from 3 separate engagements during my flight from the core worlds. I had traveled for 47 rotations without rest, without hope, following rumors and whispered intelligence reports that spoke of a species who had somehow held the line. The humans. I knew so little about them, truly. Oh, the archives contained data, biological specifications, cultural observations, technological assessments. We had monitored their development with the same detached interest we applied to any emerging species, cataloging their progress, noting their peculiarities, and ultimately classifying them as a minor curiosity, Category 4 civilization, pre-expansion, limited threat potential. They were so young. Their recorded history spanned barely 10,000 cycles, a mere heartbeat in cosmic terms. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel within the last 3 centuries of their development. Their ships were crude, their weapons unsophisticated, their understanding of fundamental physics laughably incomplete. They asked so many questions. That was what we noted most in those early assessments. The humans asked questions with an intensity that bordered on pathological. They wanted to know everything. How our drives worked, what powered our shields, why our crystals held memory, how we perceived time. They asked about our history, our art, our philosophy, our failures. They asked about species they would never meet and stars they would never visit. They asked and asked and asked until our ambassadors grew weary of their endless curiosity. We called them the questioning ones in our private communications. We said it with the patient condescension of elders watching children grasp at concepts beyond their comprehension. We feared that curiosity, in truth. We feared what they might become if they ever unlocked the secrets we guarded. A species so driven to understand, so relentless in their pursuit of knowledge, they could be dangerous given time. So we kept our distance. We shared only what we deemed safe. We answered their questions with half-truths and gentle deflections. We thought we were being wise. We thought we had millennia to manage their development. We never considered that they might be ready now. We never considered that curiosity was not the trait we should have feared. The airlock cycled open, and I stepped into the human station. It was. The corridors were functional gray metal, lit by harsh artificial light that made my membrane-covered eyes ache. There was no art on the walls, no crystalline architecture, no singing harmonics in the environmental systems. The air smelled of recycled atmosphere and something organic, some kind of stimulant beverage, I would later learn, that humans consumed with religious devotion. Everything was practical, utilitarian, designed for purpose rather than beauty. A single human waited for me in the receiving bay. She was small by the standards of her species, shorter than average, with dark hair pulled back from a face that showed the creasing patterns humans developed with age. Her uniform was plain gray fabric, unadorned except for a simple insignia on her shoulder. She carried no visible weapons, displayed no symbols of rank or authority. She looked tired. Not the performative exhaustion of a diplomat preparing to negotiate from weakness, but genuine, bone-deep weariness that showed in the slight slump of her shoulders and the shadows beneath her eyes. She looked like someone who had not slept in days, but had long since stopped caring about such things. "Archivist Vale Karath?" she said, and her pronunciation of my name was surprisingly accurate. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen. Welcome to Listening Post Sigma 7.
Her voice was quiet, calm. There was no awe in her expression at meeting a Selenari for the first time, no excitement at the presence of an elder species. She looked at me the way one might look at a particularly complex problem that had just walked through the door.
"Thank you for receiving me," I said, and even to my own ears the words sounded hollow, inadequate. I am aware that my presence here is unprecedented, that the Selenari have not always been forthcoming with your people." "No," she agreed without rancor. "You haven't." An awkward silence stretched between us. In 3,000 years of diplomatic experience, I had never felt so uncertain of how to proceed. This human did not posture, did not attempt to leverage my obvious desperation, did not make theatrical gestures of either welcome or rejection. She simply waited. "I have come to request assistance," I finally said. "The hollowing." "We know about the hollowing." I blinked, my secondary membranes flickering in surprise.
You know?
We've been tracking their advance for the last 18 cycles, Commander Chen said, and something in her tone made me deeply uneasy. We have assets in the core regions. Had assets, I should say. Most of them went dark as your defense networks collapsed. Assets? She spoke of intelligence operations in the heart of Selenari space as casually as if she were discussing weather patterns. We had never detected any human presence in our core systems. We had never even considered the possibility.
How? I asked, and the question emerged before I could stop it, before I could remember that I was the supplicant here, that I had no right to demand explanations.
Commander Chen's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. You really want to spend our limited time discussing intelligence methodology, Archivist?
I did not. But the question burned in me, that old Selenari hunger for understanding that had driven our civilization to its heights. How had they hidden from us? How long had they been watching? What else did they know that we had never suspected?
"Come with me," the commander said, turning toward the corridor. "There's someone who wants to meet you, and we have a great deal to discuss."
I followed her through the station's winding passages, and with each step, my unease grew. There were humans everywhere, emerging from doorways, passing us in the corridors, working at consoles in rooms we passed. None of them looked at me with curiosity. None of them whispered or pointed or stared. They simply continued their work, acknowledged their commander with brief nods, and went about their business.
They acted as if visits from elder species were utterly unremarkable.
They acted as if they had far more important things to worry about.
We entered a lift that carried us upward through the station's core, and Commander Chen finally spoke again.
How many worlds have you lost? The question struck like a blade. I had not expected such directness, such casual acknowledgement of our catastrophe. When I left Selvanos, the count was 473. Given the speed of their advance, I estimate that number has doubled by now.
And your remaining fleet strength?
Scattered, broken. Perhaps 30% of our original capacity, though accurate intelligence has been difficult to obtain. The words tasted like ash. We are losing, Commander. We are losing everything. She nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed something she already knew. How many cycles before they reach your core cluster?
8. Perhaps 10, if the remnant fleets can slow them sufficiently.
That's not very long.
No, it is not.
The lift opened onto a command center unlike anything I had seen on the station. Where the rest of the facility had been utilitarian and cramped, this space was vast, a hemisphere of screens and holographic displays showing star charts, fleet movements, and data streams I could not begin to interpret. Dozens of humans worked at stations arranged in concentric rings, their fingers dancing across interfaces, their voices a low murmur of technical communication. And in the center of it all, watching the displays with hands clasped behind his back, stood an old human male. His hair had gone white with age, his skin lined and weathered in ways that spoke of decades of stress and responsibility. He wore the same plain uniform as Commander Chen, though his bore additional insignia, symbols I did not recognize but understood instinctively represented authority. He did not turn as we approached, his attention fixed on a particular display showing the expansion pattern of the hollowing advance.
Fleet Admiral Marcus Webb, Commander Chen said by way of introduction. This is Archivist Vilkarov.
I know who he is. The old man's voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. I've read his file, all 1,200 pages of it.
1,200 pages. They had compiled 1,200 pages of intelligence on me specifically, a mid-tier archivist who had never held military or political authority, who had spent most of his existence cataloging the poetry of dead civilizations.
What else did they know? About our leaders, our generals, our weaknesses? How long had they been preparing for whatever this was?
Archivist, Admiral Webb said, finally turning to face me, and his eyes were the coldest I had ever seen. Not cruel, not hostile, but utterly calculating. They were the eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime making impossible decisions and who had long since stopped flinching at the consequences. I have some questions for you, and I need you to answer them honestly. Not with the diplomatic half-truths your people usually offer us. Honestly.
I will do my best.
Your best isn't good enough, he said flatly. Give me honesty or this conversation ends here. Are we clear?
I had not been spoken to with such blunt disrespect since I was a student thousands of cycles ago. The Selenari did not address one another this way. We valued decorum, nuance, the elegant dance of implication and inference.
But I was not in a position to object.
We are clear, Admiral.
Good. He turned back to the display, gesturing at the expanding red zone that represented hollowing controlled space. 6 cycles ago, your High Council sent diplomatic envoys to the collective of aligned systems, requesting military assistance against the hollowing advance. The collective refused. 4 cycles ago, your envoys approached the Thessian Combine with the same request, also refused.
2 cycles ago, you reached out to the Vorketh hegemony, a species you have been in cold conflict with for the last 3,000 years, and offered territorial concessions in exchange for fleet support.
He paused, looking at me over his shoulder.
They refused as well, didn't they?
I felt myself contract, my body's instinctive response to threat. How do you know this?
Answer the question.
Yes, they refused.
Every major power in the galaxy has refused to intervene, Admiral Webb said, returning his attention to the displays. The collective claims they can't spare the resources. The Thessians are too far from the conflict zone to be directly threatened. The Vorketh are probably hoping the hollowing will finish you off and save them the trouble.
He was correct on all counts. I had seen the intelligence reports, watched my people's desperate appeals fall on deaf ears one by one. The galaxy was content to watch the Selenari burn, confident that the hollowing would be satisfied once they had consumed us. They were wrong, of course. The hollowing would never be satisfied. But by the time the other powers understood that, it would be too late.
So now you come to us, Admiral Webb continued, the youngest species in known space, the primitives, the ones your people have kept at arm's length for 3 centuries because you feared what we might become. He turned to face me fully, and there was something terrible in his expression. Not anger, not triumph, but a kind of grim recognition. You come to us because we're the only ones left, because everyone else has already said no.
The shame was overwhelming. He was right. He was entirely, unforgivingly right. We had only approached humanity because every other option had been exhausted, because we were desperate, because we were dying.
Yes, I admitted. That is why I'm here.
Admiral Webb nodded slowly. I appreciate the honesty. Now answer me this, Archivist. Why should we help you?
The question struck me silent. I had prepared arguments, carefully constructed appeals to mutual interest and galactic stability.
I had memorized data about the hollowing threat, their expansion patterns, the inevitability that they would eventually turn their attention to human space if left unchecked.
But looking at this old man's cold eyes, I realized that none of those arguments would matter.
I don't know, I finally said. I don't know why you should help us. We have given you no reason to. We have withheld knowledge, refused your requests for technological exchange, and treated you as primitives, Commander Chen supplied quietly. As children who couldn't be trusted with adult concepts. Yes.
And now you want us to send our ships and our people to die for your survival?
I could not finish the sentence. What could I possibly say?
Admiral Webb studied me for a long moment, and then, inexplicably, his expression softened by a fraction. Sit down, Archivist. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. He gestured to a chair that had been placed near one of the display consoles, and I lowered myself into it, grateful for the support. My legs had been trembling, I realized, a physical response to stress I had not experienced since I was young. 342 years ago, Admiral Webb began, a selenary observation vessel entered our solar system, your people's first official contact with humanity. Do you know what happened during that encounter? We introduced ourselves, exchanged basic cultural information, established preliminary diplomatic protocols.
That's the sanitized version. The Admiral pulled up a historical file on one of the displays. Visual recordings of that first meeting, data logs, official reports. The truth is that your observers were horrified by us. Not by our technology or our biology, by our history. You learned about our wars, our genocides, our capacity for cruelty. You learned about the Holocaust and the killing fields and the rape of Nanking. You learned what we had done to each other, and you decided we were too dangerous to trust. I remembered those early reports. I had not been alive during first contact, but I had read the files extensively. The human capacity for violence had indeed disturbed our analysts. No species we had ever encountered had inflicted such methodical suffering upon its own kind. Your people put us in a box, Admiral Webb continued, monitored our development, limited our access to galactic resources, built contingency plans in case we ever became a genuine threat. You treated us like a disease that needed to be contained.
We were trying to protect. You were afraid, he cut me off, and your fear wasn't entirely unjustified. We can be monsters. We have been monsters. The things we've done to each other. No species with access to our history should take our good intentions on faith. He moved closer, looming over me in a way that made my instincts scream danger, even though he had made no threatening gesture. But you made a mistake, Archivist. You looked at our capacity for destruction and assumed that was all we were. You saw our darkness and missed what created it. You didn't understand that the same trait that let us slaughter each other by the millions is the trait that let us survive ice ages, mass extinctions, and the long climb from stone tools to starships.
He paused, letting the words sink in.
You should have looked more closely at the survivors, Archivist, at the ones who endured the camps and rebuilt their lives, at the ones who stood in front of tanks they couldn't possibly stop, at the ones who carried each other through fires and floods and famines, refusing to let go even when every rational calculation said to give up.
His voice dropped, becoming quiet and intense.
You feared our curiosity. You were right to. We want to understand everything, and that makes us dangerous. But curiosity isn't what defines us.
What defines us is that when everything falls apart, when hope is gone and the odds are impossible, we don't stop. We don't quit. We find a way or we die trying, but we never, ever just lie down and accept the end.
He straightened, turning back to the displays.
The Hollowing thinks it's fighting a conventional war. They think they can overwhelm your defenses, consume your populations, and move on to the next feast. They don't understand what they're about to run into.
I don't understand, I said, my voice barely a whisper. What are you saying?
Commander Chen stepped forward, pulling up a new display, a star chart centered on human space, showing deployment patterns I had never seen.
What Admiral Webb is trying to tell you, Archivist, is that while you were running to us for help, we were already moving. The display shifted, revealing a scope of activity that made my mind stutter. Ships. Thousands of ships, in formations across dozens of systems, not the crude, underpowered vessels I had seen in our intelligence reports on human capabilities. These were warships of a design I did not recognize, sleek, angular, bristling with weapons arrays that dwarfed anything I had seen outside of Selenari military archives.
The collective refused you, Commander Chen said quietly, because we asked them to. The Thesians turned you away because we suggested it would be in their interest. The Vorketh refused because we made it clear that intervening in your war would have consequences.
The blood in my body seemed to freeze. You deliberately isolated us?
We made sure that when you finally came looking for help, you would come to us, Admiral Webb confirmed. We needed time to position our forces. We needed you desperate enough to accept our terms without negotiation. And we needed the Hollowing to commit fully to your space before we revealed ourselves.
Terms? I echoed. What terms?
We'll get to that. First, I want you to understand what you're looking at. He gestured at the fleet displays. For the past century and a half, humanity has been preparing for exactly this scenario. Not the Hollowing specifically, we didn't know about them until recently, but for the day when an extinction-level threat emerged that the galaxy's elder species couldn't or wouldn't handle.
You couldn't have hidden this from us, I protested, though my certainty was crumbling with every word. We monitored your development. We tracked your industrial output, your population growth, your technological progress.
You tracked what we let you see, Commander Chen said. The surface activity, the civilian economy, the public-facing portion of human civilization. What you missed was everything happening beneath it. She pulled up new data, construction logs, resource allocations, personnel files. The scope was staggering. 17 industrial stations in the outer system, built inside hollowed asteroids to mask their energy signatures. 43 shipyards distributed across 8 star systems, producing vessels on a rotating schedule to avoid detection patterns. A research network of over 200 facilities working on everything from weapons technology to biological enhancement. And training programs that have been running continuously for the last 90 years, preparing over 12 million soldiers for combat scenarios your analysts never imagined. 12 million soldiers, 43 shipyards, 17 industrial stations. We had seen none of it. In 3 centuries of observation, we had not detected a single indication of this massive military buildup happening directly under our surveillance.
How? I asked, and the word came out as barely a croak.
Because you underestimated us, Admiral Webb said simply. You looked at our crude ships and primitive weapons and concluded that we posed no real threat
to an advanced civilization. You assumed that any development we made would be visible to your sensors. You forgot that we evolved as pack hunters, as ambush predators, as creatures who survived by hiding our strength until the moment of maximum advantage.
He smiled then, a cold, predatory expression that sent atavistic fear cascading through my nervous system. You should have watched us more closely, Archivist. You should have asked more questions about what we were doing in those unmonitored outer systems. You should have wondered why a species as curious as we are seemed so content to accept the technological limits you imposed on us.
But we did ask, I said weakly. Your people always said.
We lied. Commander Chen's voice was matter-of-fact. We told you what you wanted to hear. We acted the part of the eager young species, grateful for whatever scraps of knowledge the elders deigned to share. We smiled and asked our endless questions and let you believe we were exactly as harmless as you wanted us to be.
Why? Why go to such lengths?
Because we knew this day would come. Admiral Webb turned to face me fully, and for the first time I saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. A fire, a terrible patience, a resolve that had been forged over generations. We knew that eventually something would threaten the galaxy that the ancient powers couldn't handle. Something that would require the kind of response that your civilizations had grown too comfortable to deliver. And when that day came, we intended to be ready.
I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the scope of what I was learning. The entire history of human Selenari relations reframed. Every interaction, every diplomatic exchange, every moment of apparent deference, all of it a performance. A carefully constructed mask, hiding the truth of what humanity was building in the shadows.
You could have warned us, I finally said. You could have told us about the hollowing, helped us prepare.
Would you have listened? The question stopped me cold. Would you have believed us if we had come to you 3 centuries ago and said, someday an extinction-level threat will emerge, and you won't be able to stop it without our help? Would your High Council have accepted intelligence from primitives about a danger they couldn't detect? Would your military commanders have coordinated their defensive strategies with a species they considered barely competent to leave their home system? I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. He was right. We would not have listened. We would have smiled and nodded and explained patiently that while we appreciated their concern, the Selenari had been managing galactic security for 11,000 years, and certainly didn't need advice from a species that had only just learned to fold space. We would have dismissed them entirely. And now, sitting in this command center, surrounded by evidence of a military capability that dwarfed anything I had imagined, I understood just how badly we had miscalculated. "What are your terms?" I asked, and my voice sounded old even to my own ears. Old and tired and utterly defeated. Admiral Webb exchanged a glance with Commander Chen, a silent communication that spoke of long partnership and shared understanding. "Our terms are simple," he said. "First, full access to Selenari archives, all of them. No restrictions, no classified sections, no 'this knowledge is too dangerous for your species' deflection. Everything your civilization has learned in 11,000 years, shared completely and without condition." I nodded. The archives had been our greatest treasure, our most closely guarded resource. The thought of surrendering them to humanity would have been unthinkable even days ago. Now it felt like a small price. Second,
Integration of human tactical command into Selenary fleet operations. Your admirals will continue to lead their forces, but they will do so under a unified strategic framework coordinated by human intelligence. We know the Hollowing. We've been studying them for decades, while you were just learning they existed. If we're going to stop them, we need to make the decisions about how to do it.
This was harder. Military coordination with a species we had considered inferior, subordinating our ancient command traditions to human strategic planning. Our generals would resist. Our politicians would object.
But our generals were dead or dying, and our politicians were hiding on refugee ships as their worlds burned.
Agreed, I said.
Third, and this is non-negotiable, Archivist, when this war is over, humanity's status in the galactic community changes permanently. No more observation protocols, no more technological restrictions, no more treatment as a developing species that needs to be managed. We sit at the table as equals, with full rights and full responsibilities, and no one ever again has the authority to decide what knowledge we can or cannot access. I looked at this old human, this representative of a species we had so thoroughly underestimated, and I understood that I was not negotiating. I was receiving terms of surrender, not to an enemy, but to an ally who had been waiting for this moment for 300 years.
The High Council will need to approve. The High Council is scattered across 17 refugee fleets, most of which are currently running silent to avoid hollowing patrols. Commander Chen interrupted gently. You're the senior Selenari official with any diplomatic authority currently in human space. You can agree to these terms, or you can return to your people and explain that you failed because you couldn't accept humanity as partners instead of subordinates.
She paused, and something like sympathy flickered in her eyes. How many more worlds do you think they'll lose while you're trying to get authorization, Archivist? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 3,000 years pressing down on me. Everything I had believed about the order of things, about the proper hierarchy of civilizations, about humanity's place in the galaxy, all of it was crumbling.
I agreed to your terms, I said, and the words felt like surrender and salvation at once. All of them.
Admiral Webb nodded as if he had never expected any other answer.
Good. Now let me show you what we're going to do. He turned to the main display, and the image shifted to show a tactical overlay of the current hollowing advance. The red zone of their control had expanded since the last time I checked. 3 more of our systems had fallen while I sat in this command center, negotiating the fate of my species. The Hollowing's strength is in numbers and coordination. Their fleet elements operate as a unified organism, sharing information instantaneously and adapting their tactics in real time. Against conventional forces, this makes them nearly unbeatable. They can respond to any strategy faster than their opponents can adjust. He highlighted a series of points along the front lines. Their weakness is creativity. They're smart, but they think like a single mind. Once they've encountered a tactic, they adapt to counter it, but they can't anticipate approaches that have never been used before. They can't prepare for strategies that don't exist until the moment of execution. That's why you've been observing them, I said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. You've been waiting for them to commit, to show you every tactical pattern they have. Before revealing any of ours, Admiral Webb finished. They've never faced human military forces. They don't know our doctrine, our capabilities, or our weapons. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, they're going to encounter something they can't predict. Commander Chen pulled up a new display, a projection of fleet movements that made my breath catch in my throat.
The 1st through 7th combined fleets are already in position, she said. 1,800 primary warships, 4,200 support vessels, and approximately 900,000 combat personnel. They've been waiting at staging points for the past 3 cycles, running silent and preparing for deployment. That's nearly as many ships as the Selenari had at the height of our military strength.
That's our initial response force, Admiral Webb said. The second wave will deploy in 6 cycles, the third wave in 12. By the time we're fully mobilized, we'll have over 4,000 capital ships in the theater, with more coming off the production lines every rotation. I stared at the projections, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. This was not the military capacity of a primitive species just learning to navigate the stars. This was a war machine that had been building for over a century, designed from the ground up to face threats on a galactic scale.
Why? I asked, and the question encompassed everything: the deception, the preparation, the patience. Why did you do all this? You had no guarantee that a threat like the Hollowing would ever emerge. You had no way of knowing that you would ever need forces on this scale. You spent a century preparing for a war that might never have happened.
Admiral Webb was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant.
Do you know how humanity nearly destroyed itself, Archivist, before we ever left our home planet? Your nuclear weapons? The Cold War period?
Yes, it's in our files. Then you know that for nearly a century, we lived with the capacity to end our own species. Every day, every hour, we existed under the shadow of potential extinction, not from natural disaster or cosmic accident, but from our own choices. We built enough weapons to sterilize our world 100 times over, and we held them pointed at each other for generations.
He turned to face me, and his eyes held something ancient and terrible, a memory of fear passed down through generations.
That experience changed us. It burned something into our collective psyche that will never go away. We learned in the most visceral possible way that survival is never guaranteed, that darkness can come at any moment, that the only way to face extinction is to prepare for it before it arrives.
And so when you reached the stars, we looked at the galaxy, and we saw that it was full of threats we couldn't anticipate, species we didn't know, technologies we didn't understand. And we knew, with the same certainty that we knew the sun would rise, that eventually something would come for us. Something we couldn't talk our way out of, couldn't negotiate with, couldn't appease. He gestured at the command center around us, the ships on the displays, the personnel at their stations, the vast machinery of war that humanity had built in secret.
This is our answer, not just to the Hollowing, but to every threat that might ever arise. We will never again face extinction unprepared. We will never again be helpless in the face of darkness. We will endure whatever the cost.
I sat in silence, absorbing his words, and for the first time since the Hollowing had begun its attack, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Hope. The first human fleets made contact with the Hollowing forces 47 hours later.
I watched from the command center as the engagement unfolded, not as a diplomat now, but as an observer granted special access by Admiral Webb's authorization. Human tactical officers worked their stations with calm efficiency, coordinating movements across light years of space, tracking thousands of individual vessels in a ballet of destruction that defied comprehension.
The Hollowing fleet defending the Selvanos approach numbered approximately 70,000 vessels, a force that had shattered our most powerful defensive formation in less than a rotation. They held position around a temporal relay station they had captured, using it to coordinate their advance into our core systems. The human First Fleet emerged from fold space in a formation that made no sense to me, scattered, dispersed, seemingly disorganized. Hollowing analysis, which we were monitoring through captured communication intercepts, classified the formation as a symptom of primitive tactical doctrine. They expected an easy victory. They were wrong.
The human ships did not engage directly. Instead, they began deploying devices I had never seen before, small drones that scattered through the combat zone in apparent randomness. The hallowing forces tracked them, analyzed them, and determined they were sensor buoys of some kind, harmless reconnaissance.
Then the drones activated.
The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every hollowing ship within the deployment zone experienced simultaneous systems failure. Navigation, weapons, communication, everything went dark in an instant. The perfectly coordinated fleet became 70,000 individual vessels, blind and deaf and unable to share information with their collective.
And then the human ships opened fire. I had seen Selenari weapons in action, elegant beams of focused energy, precise and controlled. Human weapons were nothing like that. They were brutal, overwhelming, designed not for surgical precision, but for maximum destruction. Salvos of kinetic projectiles accelerated to fractional light speed, nuclear warheads enhanced with exotic matter payloads, directed energy weapons that burned through hollowing hulls like flame through paper.
In 17 minutes, the hollowing defense force was reduced to expanding clouds of debris.
"That's not possible," I whispered, watching the tactical display update with confirmed kills. "That's simply not possible." "The drones are based on captured hollowing communication technology," Commander Chen explained, standing beside me. "We spent 40 years reverse engineering their collective consciousness interface. Those disruption devices sever individual ships from the group mind, forcing them to operate independently. They've never developed independent tactical doctrine because they've never needed to."
You turned their greatest strength into a weakness.
"We had a long time to study them, Archivist. A very long time."
The battle, if it could be called that, was over in less than an hour. 70,000 hollowing vessels destroyed or disabled. The temporal relay station captured intact. And the human First Fleet having sustained less than 3% casualties. I watched the final tally appear on the display, and I understood that everything I thought I knew about military power was obsolete.
"This is only the beginning," Admiral Webb said, appearing beside me. His expression showed no triumph, no satisfaction, only the grim focus of a commander who knew the war was far from over. "The hollowing will adapt. They'll develop countermeasures. The next engagement will be harder."
But you anticipated that. We anticipated everything. He pulled up a strategic projection showing the next phase of the campaign. 14 simultaneous fleet actions across the front lines, targeting their communication infrastructure. By the time we're done, every hollowing force in Selenari space will be isolated and cut off from their collective consciousness.
And then? Then we begin the systematic liberation of your worlds. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing logistics rather than the salvation of my species. We estimate 8 to 12 cycles to clear the primary systems, 18 to 24 for complete removal of hollowing presence. After that, we'll need to establish a permanent defensive perimeter to prevent re-incursion.
I listened to him outline the destruction of an enemy that had seemed unstoppable days ago, and I felt my understanding of humanity fundamentally restructure itself.
We had feared their curiosity. We had worried about what they might become if they ever unlocked the secrets we guarded. We had not understood that their questions, endless, relentless, never satisfied, were symptoms of something far more profound.
Humans asked questions because they needed to understand. And they needed to understand because understanding was how they survived. Every piece of knowledge they acquired, every secret they unlocked, every mystery they solved, all of it became fuel for their drive to endure.
Their curiosity was not separate from their resolve. It was an expression of it.
The campaign to liberate Selenari space lasted 23 cycles.
I watched it unfold from the command center, then from refugee vessels we recaptured, then finally from the surface of Selvanos itself, a world I had never expected to see again.
The hollowing adapted, as Admiral Webb had predicted. They developed countermeasures for the disruption drones, forcing human tacticians to evolve new approaches. They concentrated their forces, creating defensive positions that should have been impenetrable. They brought in reinforcements from beyond the galactic rim, numbers that dwarfed even their initial invasion fleet. None of it mattered. Every time the hollowing adapted, humanity adapted faster. Every defensive position was overcome through tactics that had never been used before. Every reinforcement wave was met with human forces that seemed to multiply without limit, as if the species could produce ships and soldiers through sheer force of will. I learned later that the final mobilization had involved over 40,000 warships and nearly 200 million military personnel. Resources that would have taken the Selenari decades to assemble, humanity deployed in less than a single cycle. When I asked Admiral Webb how this was possible, he gave me an answer I have never forgotten. "Our people volunteered," he said. "We put out the call, explained what was at stake, and they came. From every human world, every colony, every station and outpost in our territory. They left their families, their homes, their lives, and they came. Not because we ordered them to, because they chose to." "Why?" I asked, genuinely struggling to understand. This war had nothing to do with them. The hollowing had never threatened human space directly. Your people could have remained safe. Let the galaxy's problems be the galaxy's problems. Because that's not who we are. He looked at me with something like pity in his eyes. Pity for a species that had grown so ancient and so comfortable that it could no longer understand sacrifice. When someone needs help, we help. When something threatens the innocent, we stop it. Not because it's logical, not because it serves our interests, but because it's right. Even if it means dying? Especially if it means dying. Death doesn't scare us, Archivist. It never has. What scares us is living with the knowledge that we could have helped and didn't, that we stood by while others suffered because we were too afraid, too comfortable, too rational to act. I thought about his words for a long time after that conversation. I thought about them as I watched human soldiers, young humans, barely into adulthood, charge into hollowing strongholds knowing they might not come out. I thought about them as I saw human commanders sacrifice their own ships to protect Selenari refugee convoys. I thought about them as I witnessed human medics treating wounded Selenari with the same care they showed their own species. We had feared their curiosity. We should have paid attention to their compassion. The final battle of the war took place above a world called Sanctuary. It was not a Selenari world. It was something far stranger. A planet deep in hollowing territory, hidden from detection by their own interference fields, where they had gathered the survivors of their feeding.
Billions of beings from dozens of species, kept alive but stripped of consciousness, used as organic batteries to fuel the collective's expansion.
Human intelligence had discovered Sanctuary's existence 3 cycles into the campaign. The decision to liberate it was immediate and unanimous.
The Hollowing's final defense force numbered over 100,000 vessels, everything they had left concentrated around their greatest prize. They fought with desperate ferocity, abandoning their usual tactical patience for raw, overwhelming aggression. For the first time in the war, human forces took serious casualties.
I was on the flagship during that battle, observing as Admiral Webb commanded the engagement. I watched human ships torn apart by hollowing weapons, saw escape pods deploy into space only to be destroyed by pursuing fighters. I saw the price humanity paid for their resolve, written in fire and blood across the void.
And I saw them refuse to stop.
Every time a human ship was destroyed, 2 more took its place. Every time a formation was broken, they reformed and attacked again. They did not retreat, did not hesitate, did not show any sign of the fear that any rational species would have felt facing such losses.
They simply kept coming. At the battle's peak, Admiral Webb received a report that the Hollowing had begun terminating the beings on Sanctuary's surface, executing them to deny humanity the rescue they had fought so hard to achieve.
I expected him to order a withdrawal. The rational calculation was clear. The losses from continuing the assault outweighed any possible benefit from saving survivors who might already be dead. Instead, he ordered a full acceleration. Every human ship in the fleet committed to a direct assault on Sanctuary's orbital defenses, a charge that would expose them to devastating fire, but would cut the time to surface insertion by half.
"Admiral," I said, speaking out of turn for the first time since I had come aboard, "this is suicide. You'll lose a quarter of your fleet."
I know the math, Archivist.
Then why?
Because there are people dying down there right now. While we sit here calculating acceptable losses, they're dying. And I will not leave them to die because saving them is expensive.
He turned back to the tactical display, his voice rising to carry across the command center.
"All hands, this is Admiral Webb. We are making a direct run on the Hollowing defensive line. We're going to take hits, and we're going to lose people. But every second we delay is another second those survivors don't have. So we're going in, and we're going in fast, and we're bringing them home. Webb out."
The human fleet accelerated. The Hollowing poured fire into them, and ships died by the dozens. I watched the casualty display climb with sick fascination. 20 vessels, 50, 100, 200. The price of this assault was measured in thousands of human lives.
And still they came.
They broke through the defensive line at the cost of 317 ships. They established a perimeter around the planet at the cost of another 90, and they began evacuation operations under constant fire, shuttles descending through clouds of debris and weapons discharge to reach the survivors below. I learned later that they saved 4,217,600,000 beings from Sanctuary's surface. 4 billion lives, purchased at the price of 14,000 human dead. When the last shuttle lifted off, when the last survivor was safe aboard a human transport, the remaining Hollowing forces attempted to flee. They had seen what humanity could do. They knew they could not win. The human fleet ran them down and destroyed them to the last vessel. There would be no survivors to warn others. There would be no remnant to rebuild and return. This enemy, which had consumed 3 ancient civilizations before turning its attention to the Selenari, ended that day above Sanctuary. Ended by a species that had been exploring the stars for less than 3 centuries. Ended by the primitives. Ended by humanity. The war's aftermath brought changes that will reshape the galaxy for millennia. As agreed in my terms with Admiral Webb, the Selenari archives were opened to humanity without restriction. I expected them to descend upon our knowledge with the same voracious curiosity they had always shown, to take what they wanted and disappear with their prizes. Instead, they sent archivists of their own, scholars who came not to take, but to learn, who asked questions, endless questions as always, but who also listened to the answers, who treated our accumulated wisdom not as resources to be exploited, but as sacred trust to be preserved and shared. They taught us things as well. Human art and literature and music, perspectives on the universe so different from our own that they seemed alien in the truest sense. They showed us how they saw the cosmos, not as a puzzle to be solved or a territory to be managed, but as a vast and terrible and beautiful mystery that demanded engagement. They showed us how to hope again. Admiral Webb died 7 cycles after the war's end, his body finally surrendering to the age he had held at bay through sheer force of will. I attended his memorial service on Earth, the first Selenari ever to set foot on humanity's homeworld. It was a small planet, unremarkable, really, by the standards of galactic geography. A thin shell of atmosphere around a rocky core, orbiting an average star in an undistinguished arm of the galaxy. There was nothing special about it. And yet, I stood on that small world, surrounded by billions of humans going about their ordinary lives, and I understood something that had eluded me for 3,000 years. Significance is not a function of size or age or power. It is not measured in the span of your history or the reach of your technology. It is measured in how you respond when everything falls apart. The Selenari had 11,000 years to prepare for the hollowing. We had built the greatest civilization in galactic history, accumulated knowledge and power and influence beyond measure, and when the darkness came, we broke. Humanity had 3 centuries. They had crude ships and primitive weapons and a history of atrocity that should have disqualified them from any claim to moral authority. And when the darkness came, they stood. Not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced, but because they simply would not stop. Because resolve is not a function of capability, it is a choice made fresh every moment, in the face of every obstacle, through every loss and setback and failure, a choice to continue when continuation seems impossible. Humanity makes that choice like breathing. It is woven into their nature, burned into their collective soul by a history of struggle that would have broken any other species. We feared their curiosity. We should have feared their resolve. No, we should have understood that fear was never the right response. We should have looked at this strange, contradictory, beautiful species and seen what they truly were. Not a threat to be managed, but an answer to a question we had forgotten how to ask. What does it mean to survive? Not to endure, not to persist,
not to simply continue existing from one moment to the next.
To survive is to face the darkness and refuse to yield. To stand when standing is impossible. To fight when fighting is futile. To hope when hope is irrational.
To be human.
I am Val Korath, first archivist of what was once the greatest civilization in the galaxy. I have lived for 3,712 standard cycles, witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and catalogued the history of species that no longer exist.
And I will spend whatever time remains to me learning from humanity.
Learning to ask questions not for the answers they provide, but for the connections they create.
Learning to face the unknown not with fear, but with wonder.
Learning to endure, not through power, but through resolve.
The stars do not remember.
But we will. We will remember everything, every struggle and every triumph, every loss and every victory, every moment when the darkness seemed absolute and a single stubborn species refused to accept the end.
We will remember what humanity taught us. We will remember how to be brave.
And when the next darkness comes, because there is always another darkness, always another threat lurking beyond the edge of the known, we will face it together. Human and Selenari and every other species that has learned what I learned in that command center, in that war, in that small moment when an old man looked at impossible odds and chose to fight anyway.
We will face it with resolve. And we will not yield. Train yourself as an elite HFY Sci-Fi storyteller.
Write a single continuous HFY science fiction story of approximately 40,000 characters using the exact title.
Aliens feared human curiosity. They should have feared our resolve. HFY Sci-Fi story. The title must shape the entire narrative, tone, and payoff of the story, with the meaning of the title becoming fully clear only by the end.
The story must begin quietly and cinematically with a reflective, almost poetic opening about the stars, time, or history, creating a sense of cosmic scale before any conflict is revealed. Avoid action at the start. Build curiosity, mystery, and emotional tension immediately so the audience feels compelled to keep listening.
The narrative must follow a clear point of view, primarily from a non-human alien character belonging to an ancient, highly advanced civilization that has existed for thousands of years and once dismissed humanity as primitive, insignificant, or dangerous. This character must be named and emotionally developed, showing exhaustion, fear, regret, suppressed pride, and growing awe. The alien civilization must be facing a catastrophic collapse or extinction-level war, with losses revealed gradually through dialogue, memory, and observation. Fleets, worlds, and billions of lives must be lost, but never dumped all at once. Let the scale unfold naturally and emotionally.
Humans must initially appear calm, restrained, and unimpressive on the surface. Their stations, ships, and behavior should feel functional rather than grand. Human characters should be polite, observant, emotionally intelligent, and controlled. They must never boast or explain their power directly. Their strength should feel unsettling because it is quiet.
Use natural, realistic dialogue extensively, especially in the first half. Conversations should carry tension, empathy, and subtle power shifts.
Humans should ask questions that unsettle the alien character emotionally rather than threaten them physically.
The HFY reveal must be a slow burn. Humanity's true nature should emerge through adaptability, strategic thinking, unity, endurance, and an almost frightening calm in the face of annihilation. Their history of hardship and survival must quietly explain why they are different.
As the story progresses, show humans preparing, mobilizing, or responding on a scale that shocks the ancient alien civilization, not through spectacle, but through coordination, inevitability, and confidence. The alien POV character should gradually realize that humanity was never weak, only restrained.
The final third of the story must deliver a powerful HFY payoff that feels earned. Humanity's response should be overwhelming, precise, and unstoppable, fulfilling the promise of the title. The alien POV character must experience awe, fear, humility, and understanding as the balance of power irrevocably shifts.
End with a strong emotional conclusion, not just victory. The final lines should leave the audience with chills, reinforcing themes of humility, endurance, empathy, and the terrifying strength of a species forged by struggle.
Do not include bullet points, section headers, explanations, summaries, or author commentary.
Do not rush pacing.